Hello, so Honors CP Bio. This is our continuation of Chapter 51, and this is 51.3. It is on selection and how organisms select each other for mating, survival, and what we call reproductive fitness. And it has to do with the how and the why. And remember, we started off with section 51.1, which was sensory inputs and how different sensory inputs affect the animals. So it's what we call a proximal cause and an ultimate cause. So a proximal cause and sensory input would be, for example, the hours of daylight, telling an organism that it's being reduced and they should migrate, and that would be the proximal versus the ultimate cause. The ultimate is that they start migrating. And there were 4 sensory inputs that you should review. And then we went on to animal behavior and the 6 factors that can affect that, both innate and the different experiences that an organism goes through. And again, I would review section 51.2. In 51.3, they talk about how organisms decide who is going to be their prospective mate, or why I should pick a certain mate. And so the start of the chapter talks about foraging and the optimal foraging model. And so that has to do with risk versus reward. And in the textbook, they talk about an experimental observational study that was done with crows. And crows happen to be extremely intelligent, often hunt and feed in groups. And ravens are even more intelligent than that. And I can remember out in Yellowstone, I brought my youngest granddaughter a couple of years ago to Yellowstone, and she was just fascinated. We were at watching grizzlies, and what caught her attention, here we are, Yellowstone, and she watches for a good 20 minutes at a raven picking off all of these bugs off a grill of a car. It knew that was a very good, easy food source. And so there was virtually no risk for the raven. It's sitting there, the car is there, it's not in traffic, and the reward was great. It had quite the food source. So in optimal foraging, it's the ability of an animal to get a great deal of food, or enough food to sustain itself, with very little energy resources. And again, take a look at the crow study that was in the textbook, or the PowerPoints, and that shows that crows will have to spend energy to grab a shell off a beach in I believe it was North Carolina, and they're called whelk shells. So you would know them as conch shells, but they're actually no conch shells in North or South Carolina. They're whelk shells, and they would pick them up and know to drop them over rocks so they would shatter. And they're as if the crow was having to go higher and higher because the whelk shell is more tough and would have a lot more meat. There's a risk involved at them expending too much energy and the shell never breaking and them not getting that food source. So as you can imagine, there are not thousands of whelk shells on the beach, and so there's only a certain amount of food source for them. What I've put in Google Classroom is a very interesting, it's about 6 minutes, part of an episode of Northwood's Law. It's a television show based off of the game wardens of New Hampshire, and they are investigating a large turtle kill, spotted turtles, I believe. And so biologists called in the game wardens because they were talking about 30, 40 shells, and the animals were broken open. And so the game warden and the biologist finally determined it's a raven that is doing this behavior. They found a large source of turtles. They would pick the turtle up by probably the head or the neck, drop it, the shell would break, and then it would feast on it. The unintelligent part of that raven is that they went through so many turtles, they're going to have to move on. They really wiped out their food source. So again, many animals will decide if you're a very good forager, you might make a very good mate for me. And then we have more specific mating behaviors. And here we have the 5 that the textbook talks about. And first of all is just about being able to, how much can you reproduce? So the behaviors are promiscuous, monogamous, polygamous, and let's start with monogamy, is having one partner for life. And there are quite a few birds and other animals that do that. First example into my mind is swans, that will mate for life. Loons mate for life. There are certain ducks that will. I had a very nasty occurrence when I was living in Virginia Beach. I had noticed this pair of ducks that were not the most intelligent. They had nested close to the road that I always drove on. There was a canal and a stream there. I think the reason why is that there were low predators there. It was close to the road, so most of the average duck predators, snapping turtles, etc., were not going to risk going near the ducks. What the ducks did not expect was that it got too close to the road, and one of them got hit by a car. And as I'm driving by that morning, I see the other one is just trying to encompass the dead duck by holding its wing over it and sort of like grabbing hold of it. And I was just so upset by it. I stopped my car to go at least move the dead duck off the side of the road when fate would have it, and another car came by and hit the other duck too. So both of them were gone. But that is that monogamous behavior, mating for life. And there is a few good parts to that in that it's a strong relationship, and they always stay together during the mating and the raising of the young. The unfortunate piece of that is that if one dies, the other one often will sort of mourn itself into death as well. And the polygamous behavior is one where there will be one kind of king of the hill, and will have a great deal of other males or females that it will mate with. And in this case, the easiest example, for the one you're probably most familiar with, is lions, where there'll be generally one male lion in the pride and many females, and he is the one that is responsible for sort of overseeing the reproduction of the females. The negative component of this is that it can really damage the gene pool. If a male lion is particularly strong and young, he can actually survive or fight off younger males for quite a significant period of time, which is sort of like shortening that gene pool. And oftentimes there'll be other younger males that will be allowed to remain within the pride until at some point they go after the adult male. And promiscuous is one that I witnessed this past spring while I was up here at the cottage in Maine. And there were mallard ducks had come in from migration, and there was a female that was very close to where my property is. And I watched as male after male would go on top of her and shove her under the water. And so this was just ensuring that she got eventually a set of eggs, because it takes sometimes many matings before it is successful. Another part of that mating behavior that will decide whether an organism is one particular mate would be more successful than another has to do with parental care. And so I put in a video there about killdeer birds, and so they are both strong, both male and female, about parental care, and that their little clutch of eggs are more important than virtually their own lives. And so what will happen is that they will pretend to have a broken wing if they see a predator nearby their nest. And please watch the video. I was kind of surprised when I watched this. Killdeer, their little nests are in the ground, and they're sort of camouflaged in this gravel. And so several killdeer had several nests all in a little gravel path, which did not seem very logical to me. And on top of that, what was strange is that the young remain absolutely still and silent when there's a predator nearby. But that parental care piece, in the textbook, they give you an example of a fish that holds all of the eggs within its jaw for the entire time, from the time the eggs are laid until they hatch. And I had students last year do a little bit of research on this particular fish as to how long it could survive and what kind of fat store it needed, because it can't feed. The entire time it has all the eggs, it can't feed. It'd be interesting for you to take a look at the book and then look up as to that particular fish and its behavior as far as how long it can survive without feeding itself. And then we have a whole group on mate choice. And actually, I want to say one more thing about parental care. Strangely enough, 10% of the species that have internal fertilization, both parents don't remain. The male just leaves. And 50% of external fertilization, it's the male remains as a parental caregiver. I thought that was very strange. And so here with mate choice, we have imprinting again. We've already talked about that with 51.2. And then mate choice, and we're focusing on the females. So with that imprinting, some of the characteristics that are favorable for choosing a mate happen very soon after the animal is born. And they give the example in the textbook of zebra finches. And they are a very tiny little bird. In fact, I had 2 of them as a young child. You could buy them at the pet shop. And they discovered that the first male zebra finch that the newborn female sees, they imprint on the characteristics, and that's the same characteristics that that bird goes after. And as far as humans are concerned, there's quite a bit of psychological study done on many girls who are daddy's little favorite, and she tends to go after the same sort of characteristics later on in life for her own companion. And we also have examples of what we call good genes. And so that's going to be an honors option assignment. So in the good genes observational study, field study that they did, scientists took a look at how long the calls were of this particular frog. And so if you're out at night and you've lived near a pond or a lake in New Hampshire or up here in Maine, for example, you hear all of the frogs, bullfrogs and the tree frogs singing away. And so the length of time of that song is actually a characteristic that a female will go after. But we have to go back to the risk involved in that. For the male to keep singing, he has an energy risk to that. So you have to really wonder about, they did this study measuring how long the frog's call was and what the energy risk was. So that'll be a very interesting honors option for you. And that will be assigned during this section. You also have what is called male competition. Again, you're really familiar with that. And that again is that male lion having to fight off other lions, and there will be a risk versus reward, and that the reward is it gets to stay to be king of the hill, and it still keeping their pride of lions in the females. The risk is oftentimes that male lion is killed in the act, so that's a large gamble. Oftentimes there's sort of like this summing up, like how much of a risk is this for me? My husband, when he was alive, told me about that as teenagers. Boys have a tendency, if they're about to get into a fight, is to sort of like secretly size up their competition. Do I have a chance at winning this fight, or am I going to look foolish? And he said, if you're going to look foolish, you decide not to throw that punch and walk away. So that's a risk versus that reward again. Another male competition the textbook tells you about is kangaroos, and they can be quite violent as fighting for competition as well. Again, risk versus reward. And our final piece is game theory. And this is a frequency dependent on what the population looks like. And it talks about phenotypes. And phenotypes are the coloration of the organism. And in this case, it talks about the side-blotched lizard, orange, blue, and yellow, and how much territory it has. The orange-throated lizard, and those are the same species, it's just they're different colorations, tends to be extremely mean and has a large territory, whereas the blue-throated lizard tends to have a very small area that it is concerned about and territorial about, and the yellow-throated one tends to be, they talk about it being very sneaky. It can actually mimic being a female and sort of invade all the territories, and the males don't seem to notice it, and they then can reproduce that way. So the females often will make a decision based on population. If there's a great deal of the mean orange ones, large in their territory, they tend to go with the orange. If the blue ones seem to be blue-throated seem more successful, they'll mate with those. And if they're sort of in between and there's the population of blue and orange tend to be about the same males, they'll go with the yellow. So I would spend the time, make sure you read 51.3 sections so that you don't get behind. And our next section will be on 51.4, and that ends the chapter, so you should be nearly done your reading. Thank you.